The receptionist laughed like she'd just heard the world's funniest joke. "We're full," she said, shaking her head. "No rooms for you tonight." Jonathan Roumie stood there quietly, calm as a lake on a windless morning. No anger in his eyes, no raised voice, just a slight, knowing smile. Lisa, the receptionist, leaned back in her chair, tapping her nails on the counter. She had been working the front desk for years and prided herself on being in control. Guests came and went, and she thought she ruled over every reservation, every key card, every minor inconvenience that dared to cross her path. She didn't see Jonathan Roumie as a man, just another problem to handle. "Are you serious?" she scoffed. "We're completely booked. You can try another hotel." He nodded. "I understand. Understand?" She laughed, louder this time. "Understand that there's no room for you. Move along, please." Guests in the lobby began to notice. Some stared, eyebrows raised. Others pulled out their phones, curious why this man wasn't arguing or pleading. Most people would have raised their voices, demanded answers, or walked out in frustration. Not him. Jonathan's quiet presence was unusual, almost magnetic. Lisa leaned forward, trying to assert dominance, her voice dripping with superiority. "Look, we're busy. I don't have time for anyone who can't follow the rules." Rules. That word hung in the air, sharp as a knife. Jonathan didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply waited, letting her words and her attitude fill the lobby with tension. The staff watched, unsure whether to intervene. Some whispered under their breath, "Who does he think he is?" Others just shook their heads, uncomfortable at the standoff. Then, almost silently, Jonathan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his reservation confirmation. No fanfare, no flourish. Just a small piece of paper that said he had every right to a room. Lisa glanced at it and smirked. "Cute, that doesn't change anything." Her laughter was loud and dismissive. Guests glanced nervously at each other. Some recorded on their phones, unsure if they were witnessing a mistake or something bigger. And then, almost like time slowed down, Jonathan turned and began walking toward the lobby exit. Calm, unbothered. The tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. Nobody in the hotel could have predicted what would happen next. 9 minutes later, everything changed. It was a bustling Friday evening at the Grand Horizon Hotel. The lobby buzzed with activity, guests checking in after long flights, families juggling luggage, and bellhops rushing to meet the next arriving car. The marble floors gleamed under the warm chandelier lights, and the smell of fresh coffee from the cafe mixed with the faint aroma of polished wood. Lisa, the receptionist, strutted behind the counter like she owned the place. Her uniform was crisp, her posture rigid, and every movement radiated authority. She had spent years working the front desk, learning the ins and outs of hotel management, and she believed that power meant showing it off, especially when others dared to challenge her. She snapped at staff, corrected the smallest errors in their speech, and made sure every guest knew she was in charge. The hotel staff had learned to walk on eggshells around her. Some did it out of respect, some out of fear, and some simply to avoid her wrath. Everyone knew. Lisa didn't just manage the front desk. She ruled it, and then he walked in. A man with calm, deliberate steps entered the lobby. Jeans, a simple jacket, nothing flashy. No entourage, no bodyguards, no flashy phone call to announce his arrival. Just him, quiet, composed, and fully aware of the space around him. It was Jonathan Roumie. The moment he stepped inside, something shifted. The air seemed a little cooler, the noise a little softer. He approached the counter, not with arrogance, not with impatience, but with a polite, measured confidence. Guests looked up from their phones. The staff paused mid-motion. Even Lisa, who thought she had seen every type of guest, felt a tiny ripple of unease. Jonathan smiled faintly and reached for the counter. "Good evening. I'd like to check in, please," he said, voice calm and warm. Lisa glanced at him and immediately sized him up. No flashy clothes, no fancy watch, no attitude, but she didn't know why. Something about him made her instinctively tighten her jaw. "I'm sorry," she said, leaning back in her chair. "We're fully booked tonight. No rooms available." He nodded politely. "I understand." Lisa raised her eyebrows. "Understand? You understand that there's literally no room for you? You can try another hotel if you'd like." The staff watched, some whispering, some wide-eyed, unsure whether to intervene. Guests had started to notice the exchange. Some glanced between Jonathan and Lisa with curiosity. Others raised their eyebrows, sensing tension they couldn't quite explain. Lisa decided to assert her authority more aggressively. She leaned forward, tapping her fingers on the counter. "Look, we're extremely busy tonight. I don't have time for people trying to bend rules. If you don't have a reservation, then you're wasting your time." Her words were sharp, almost cutting. The lobby fell into a strange silence, the usual hum of chatter fading into something tense, almost like a held breath. Jonathan didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. Instead, he calmly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small slip of paper, his reservation confirmation. No drama, no theatrics, just the proof that he had a legitimate booking. Lisa glanced at the paper, then at him. Her lips curled into a smirk. "Cute," she said, almost mockingly. "That doesn't change anything. Even with this, we're still fully booked." "No exceptions." The staff shifted nervously. Some whispered, "Who does he think he is?" Others quietly recorded the moment on their phones, sensing that something unusual was unfolding in front of them. Jonathan didn't speak. He didn't raise his voice. He simply smiled faintly, almost as if he had seen this type of arrogance 1,000 times before. The calm in his presence was unnerving. He wasn't there to fight. He wasn't there to demand. He was just present. And in that presence, the absurdity of Lisa's behavior became painfully obvious. A young bellhop standing near the side desk whispered to a co-worker, "Why isn't he arguing? Most people would have lost it by now." Lisa huffed, her patience thinning. "I'm telling you, we have no rooms. I don't care who you are. Please leave before I call security." Jonathan nodded once more. "I understand," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Then almost in slow motion, he turned toward the lobby exit. Calm, composed, completely unbothered. The lobby felt heavier after he moved. The staff exchanged uncertain glances. Guests whispered among themselves. Some stared at their phones, others at the departing figure who seemed to command attention without even trying. And then, a shift, something subtle but undeniable. A ripple through the room that suggested things were about to change. The calm, respectful energy Jonathan carried contrasted so sharply with the arrogance and impatience of Lisa that everyone in the lobby felt it. 9 minutes. That's all it took. 9 minutes would change everything in this hotel, in this lobby, and in Lisa's understanding of respect, humility, and true authority. Jonathan Roumie walked toward the lobby exit with the calm of someone who had nothing to prove. Every step measured, every movement deliberate. The murmur of guests and staff seemed to fade behind him, leaving only the tension between what had been said and what everyone instinctively knew was about to happen. Lisa, the receptionist, watched him go, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "I can't believe this," she whispered under her breath. "He's just walking out." A few guests tried to interject, some offering her polite reminders. "Ma'am, he has a reservation." But Lisa waved them off with a sharp gesture. Authority, she believed, meant never backing down, and she certainly wasn't about to let some calm, unassuming man embarrass her in front of the lobby. Jonathan stopped near the exit, turned slightly, and faced her once more. His expression was soft but unwavering. "Sometimes arrogance blinds the eyes that should see," he said quietly. Lisa blinked, momentarily confused. Arrogance? Eyes that should see? What was he talking about? But before she could respond, a bellhop approached, trying to mediate. "Ma'am, he's a guest with a confirmed booking. Maybe we should—" Lisa cut him off, snapping, "I said we're full. That's final." Her voice echoed across the marble lobby, sharp enough to make nearby guests flinch. She thought she had control, but at that moment it was slipping. Jonathan's smile remained faint and knowing. He didn't raise his voice, didn't demand anything. He simply exuded a quiet confidence, the kind of presence that doesn't ask permission, but naturally commands attention. Some of the guests started to notice it. A woman with her phone raised paused mid-recording, sensing that this interaction was bigger than it appeared. Lisa, feeling her authority challenged, tried a new tactic. She reached under the counter and picked up the hotel ledger. "See here," she said, pointing aggressively. "Every room is accounted for. There's nothing left. You can try elsewhere or I can call security. Your choice." Jonathan, however, didn't flinch. He looked at the ledger, then back at her, and shook his head slowly. "I'm not here to create trouble," he said softly. I simply came to honor my reservation. But it seems respect is harder to find than a room tonight. Her cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anger. How dare he? The man hadn't raised his voice, hadn't insulted her, yet he had made her feel powerless. The staff shifted nervously, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. Some guests whispered under their breath, "Who is this guy?" Lisa, desperate to regain control, slammed her hand on the counter. "Enough," she shouted. "I don't care if you're a celebrity or whoever you think you are. You will leave now!" At that moment, Jonathan did something remarkable. He didn't argue, he didn't beg, he didn't retaliate. He simply reached into his pocket again, pulling out the reservation confirmation that proved he had every right to a room. He held it calmly, showing her the evidence without a hint of threat or demand. The staff leaned in and guests watched. The power dynamics in the lobby had shifted in those quiet seconds. What had been arrogance on one side was now being met by quiet dignity on the other. Lisa's face went pale. She realized something in that moment, a subtle but undeniable truth, that her behavior had crossed a line. A young clerk near the back whispered to another, "Isn't that Jonathan Roumie?" The actor from Lisa froze. Recognition flashed across her face. But she didn't have time to dwell on it. The realization came too late. The calm authority Jonathan carried had already exposed the gap between respect earned and respect assumed. Jonathan nodded once, as if acknowledging the lesson he had just delivered without speaking it aloud. Then, almost imperceptibly, he began walking toward the lobby exit again, leaving Lisa trembling behind the counter. The staff and guests held their breath. Some recorded the moment, some whispered among themselves. The tension was thick, like a storm cloud hanging over the polished marble floors. 9 minutes of patience. Common dignity had done what no amount of shouting, snapping, or asserting authority could. It had shifted the room's energy entirely. Lisa's hands shook as she clutched the counter. For the first time in years, she felt powerless, exposed not just to the staff and guests, but to herself. Her ego had blinded her. Her arrogance had allowed a single act of calm presence to topple her perceived authority. And then, as Jonathan's figure disappeared toward the lobby exit, a ripple of anticipation spread through the room. Something was coming. Something that would change the hotel, its staff, and Lisa's understanding of respect forever. No one in the lobby could have predicted what happened next. Jonathan Roumie's calm steps toward the lobby exit seemed to stretch time. The chatter of the lobby had dimmed to a quiet hum, like the world was holding its breath. Guests paused mid-conversation. Staff froze mid-task. Even the bellhop who had tried to mediate seconds earlier stopped, staring at the departing figure with wide eyes. Something about the way he moved radiated quiet authority, a presence that demanded attention without demanding it. Lisa, behind the front desk, felt a knot in her stomach tighten. Her ego, so carefully constructed over years of asserting authority, had been shaken in mere minutes by a man who hadn't shouted, scolded, or raised a finger. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady herself. She felt the eyes of guests and staff upon her, questioning, judging, silently whispering about her behavior. "Wait, that's Jonathan Roumie, isn't it?" A young clerk whispered to a co-worker near the back. His voice was barely audible over the quiet hum of the lobby, but it carried a tone of awe. Lisa's head snapped toward the voice. Recognition hit her like a lightning bolt. Jonathan Roumie? The man she had just dismissed, the one she had told to leave and mocked for insisting on a reservation. It was him, the actor, the face on the posters she had walked past countless times, the man who had inspired millions with his roles on screen. Her stomach churned with a mix of shock and disbelief. She wanted to call after him, apologize, beg for forgiveness, but the words stuck in her throat. She realized in that split second that her arrogance had blinded her. She had treated a guest with disrespect, someone who had every right to a room, someone who could have retaliated, embarrassed her, or made the night unbearable, and he hadn't. He had responded with patience, dignity, and quiet grace. Guests began to murmur. Phones came out as people recorded the moment, capturing the stillness, the tension, and the unmistakable aura surrounding Jonathan. Some whispered in awe. He didn't even argue. He didn't even get mad, he just walked calmly. A couple near the front desk exchanged glances. "I've never seen anyone handle disrespect like that," one said. "And she They nodded subtly toward Lisa, who was still frozen behind the counter. Had no idea who she was dealing with. Lisa's colleagues moved cautiously, exchanging worried looks. For the first time, they realized how quickly respect can shift, how fragile authority can be when it isn't rooted in humility. She had been the one asserting control, but the real power in the room now belonged to Jonathan. The lobby felt almost electric. There was a sense that something was about to happen, something that would transform the entire dynamic. Every guest, every staff member, even those just passing through, could sense it. They didn't know what it was yet, but anticipation hung thick in the air. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the hotel doors swung open. A sleek black car pulled up outside, the engine low and powerful, signaling arrival. 3 hotel executives entered quickly, holding documents and briefcases, their steps purposeful and urgent. Guests and staff alike turned, instinctively sensing that the narrative they had been watching unfold in slow motion was about to reach its turning point. "Jonathan Roumie, we've been waiting for you, sir," one of the executives called out, moving quickly toward the lobby. Lisa froze, eyes wide. The reality crashed over her in a wave. This man, this calm, unassuming guest, was someone of immense importance. Someone who wielded real influence. Someone she had just insulted, just dismissed. The lobby fell into stunned silence. Even the bellhop, the young clerk, and the guests recording on their phones stopped moving. They were witnesses to a moment of realization, the kind that would be replayed in their minds long after Jonathan left the building. Jonathan turned slightly, acknowledging the executives with a faint nod. There was no arrogance in his demeanor, no sense of superiority, only calm composure and quiet authority. It was clear that he had orchestrated this moment not for spectacle, but as a lesson, an example of how patience, dignity, and respect can be more powerful than anger, aggression, or self-importance. Lisa's mind raced. The shame was almost physical. She could feel it in her chest, her throat tight with regret. She had treated someone with disdain because she didn't recognize who he was, and in doing so, she had learned something far more important than any managerial rule or procedure. Respect isn't about status. It's about character. Every staff member in the lobby had learned the same lesson in those 9 minutes, and as the executives approached Jonathan, the lobby seemed to exhale, the tension dissipating as the reality of the situation became undeniable. The reaction wasn't just shock, it was awe, humility, and the realization that a single act of calm presence could transform an entire room. And for Lisa, that lesson would be unforgettable. The lobby was electric. Guests and staff alike had frozen mid-motion, their eyes glued to the figure at the entrance. Jonathan Roumie stood there calmly, composed, radiating an aura that drew attention without demanding it. The 3 executives moved quickly, their steps purposeful, papers and folders clutched tightly in their hands. Every movement felt deliberate, as though the universe itself had slowed down to witness this moment. "Jonathan Roumie, we've been waiting for you, sir," one of the executives called out. His voice was sharp but respectful, commanding, yet tinged with urgency. Lisa's jaw dropped. Her fingers, still clutching the counter for support, trembled slightly. Jonathan Roumie. The actor? The celebrity? The man she had mocked, dismissed, and told to leave? Yes, it was him. Her mind raced to process what she had just done in the past 9 minutes. She had humiliated him, or at least thought she had, and yet here he was, unbothered, calm, and composed. Jonathan's eyes met hers, a faint, knowing smile on his face. There was no malice, no revenge, only quiet authority, the kind that commanded respect without uttering a word. The lobby seemed to hold its collective breath. One of the executives approached, holding a folder. "Sir, these documents finalize your acquisition. Effective immediately, you are the new majority owner of Grand Horizon Hotel." The words hit Lisa like a thunderbolt. She stumbled back slightly, her hand flying to her mouth. Guests gasped. A few whispered to each other, realizing just how monumental this moment was. The man she had just dismissed, the one she thought was a mere guest, had been in charge all along. Jonathan nodded slightly at the executives, then turned his attention back to the lobby. "I came here tonight simply to check in," he said, his voice calm, measured. "But I see now that a change is needed, not just for the hotel, but for the hearts and minds of those who work here." Lisa's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment, fear, and awe. She had been so certain of her authority. so sure of her dominance behind the counter, and yet in 9 minutes she had been humbled completely. Her arrogance, her impatience, her quickness to judge someone she didn't recognize, all of it had been exposed. The executives nodded respectfully toward Jonathan. "We'll implement your directives immediately, sir," one said. The lobby staff exchanged glances. Whispers spread like wildfire. "He's the new owner? The man she just insulted?" Jonathan's gaze swept the room. He stopped briefly at Lisa, his eyes soft but piercing. "Respect isn't earned by position or authority," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. "It is given freely, regardless of who you think you're dealing with." Lisa's knees weakened. She felt the full weight of the lesson. Every arrogant word, every dismissive gesture she had made had been unnecessary. Here was someone with power, someone who could have humiliated her in return, but instead he had led with patience and dignity. A young clerk, standing a few steps away, leaned toward a colleague. "Did she just get schooled by a guest?" The colleague nodded, eyes wide, unable to believe what was unfolding before them. Jonathan spoke again, this time addressing the staff more broadly. "From today forward, we treat every guest with respect, every colleague with kindness, and every situation with patience. True authority comes from humility, not ego." The atmosphere in the lobby shifted. Guests whispered among themselves, some recording the exchange on their phones. The energy that had been tense and charged with confrontation only minutes before now pulsed with awe and realization. Lisa swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were. Jonathan held up a hand, gentle but firm. "That's exactly the point," he said. "Respect should never be conditional on who someone is. It should be automatic, sincere, and universal." The executives moved forward to implement changes, assigning new responsibilities to staff members who had conducted themselves with humility during the incident. Lisa watched, humbled, as her understanding of authority and respect was reshaped entirely in the span of 9 minutes. Jonathan Roumie, who had entered the hotel as a quiet, unassuming guest, had transformed the entire environment with his patience, dignity, and example. And as he walked toward the elevators to begin his work as the new owner, everyone in the lobby knew that they had witnessed a moment they would never forget. For Lisa, for the staff, and for every guest present, the lesson was crystal clear. Arrogance and judgment can crumble in an instant. True respect is earned not by asserting power, but by showing humility, patience, and understanding. And in those 9 minutes, Jonathan Roumie had done exactly that. Lisa stood frozen behind the front desk, her hands gripping the counter as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her face burned with embarrassment, her mind replaying the past 9 minutes over and over. She had believed she was in control, that her authority and confidence would command respect, and yet every one of her assumptions had been dismantled in moments by a man who didn't shout, demand, or flaunt power. He had simply walked in, been calm, polite, and patient, and in doing so, he had revealed her arrogance for all to see. The hotel lobby, once tense and buzzing with judgment, now pulsed with a quiet sense of awe. Guests whispered among themselves, exchanging glances that said everything words couldn't. Even those who had previously been recording on their phones lowered them, realizing they were witnessing something far more profound than just a viral moment. They were seeing humility and respect in action. Jonathan Roumie, standing a few feet away, turned toward Lisa. His gaze was calm but steady, piercing yet kind. "You've made mistakes," he said softly, "but that's part of being human. What matters is how you respond to them." Lisa's voice trembled as she tried to speak. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't know who you were. She swallowed hard, the words catching in her throat. "I never should have treated you that way." Jonathan shook his head slightly, a gentle smile on his lips. "That's exactly the point," he said. "Respect shouldn't depend on status, fame, or position. It should be given freely, genuinely, at all times. It's not something you show to impress others. It's something you show because it's right." Lisa's knees weakened, and she sank slightly toward a chair behind the counter. The weight of humility pressed down on her, but not in a way that crushed her. Rather, it opened her eyes. For the first time in years, she truly understood what leadership and respect meant. She had believed authority was about power, about asserting dominance, about bending others to her will. But true authority, she realized, came from integrity, patience, and empathy. The lobby staff, who had been watching silently, exchanged glances filled with newfound respect. The young clerk who had whispered Jonathan's name earlier leaned forward. "Ma'am," he said gently, "he handled that with dignity. And he's teaching all of us something we won't forget." Jonathan addressed the staff next, his voice calm but filled with quiet authority. "From today forward, we treat every guest and every colleague with the same respect we wish to receive. Leadership is not about titles, authority, or power. It's about humility, patience, and example. True change starts with small actions, repeated over time." The executives moved forward, implementing immediate changes to improve hotel operations, guest experience, and staff training. But the most significant change wasn't in the paperwork or policies. It was in the hearts and minds of the people present. They had witnessed a transformation, a living lesson in humility and respect. Lisa, feeling both humbled and inspired, looked around at her colleagues. She saw the way they carried themselves now, the subtle shift in posture and expression. There was a new sense of unity, of mutual respect. She realized that her behavior had affected not just her interactions with Jonathan, but also the environment she had created for everyone around her. Jonathan's eyes returned to her, soft but firm. "Leadership isn't about never making mistakes," he said. "It's about recognizing them and choosing to grow from them. Your willingness to reflect, to apologize, and to learn, that's what will define you moving forward." Tears prickled at the corners of Lisa's eyes. She nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I understand, sir. Thank you for teaching me this lesson." Jonathan nodded once, satisfied. He turned toward the elevators, signaling that his work for the evening was just beginning. Guests and staff continued to watch him, some whispering in awe, others silently committing to carry the lesson forward in their own lives. The lobby, once tense and chaotic, now felt lighter, almost serene. The energy had shifted completely, from arrogance and judgment to humility and respect. Lisa took a deep breath, straightening her posture. She could feel the weight of responsibility differently now. Authority wasn't about control, it was about example, patience, and empathy. As Jonathan disappeared from view, moving on to execute the changes he had envisioned, Lisa and the staff understood something profound. They had been part of a moment that would stay with them forever. A lesson not just about respect, but about the quiet, transformative power of patience, humility, and integrity. For Lisa, it was a rebirth of understanding. For the staff, it was a lesson in true leadership. And for everyone in the lobby that night, it was a story they would recount for years. A story about a man who came in quietly, taught more with his presence than words, and changed everything in just 9 minutes. The lobby had returned to its usual rhythm, the hum of guests chatting, bellhops moving luggage, and the distant clatter of coffee cups in the cafe. But for those who had witnessed the events of the past 9 minutes, nothing would ever feel quite the same again. The atmosphere was forever changed, infused with a subtle but undeniable lesson about respect, humility, and the quiet power of presence. Lisa, still behind the counter, took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Her hands, which had trembled only moments ago, now rested calmly on the polished surface. She felt a mixture of relief, humility, and awakening. The weight of the lesson she had just experienced pressed upon her, not as punishment but as clarity. She realized that authority, respect, and leadership were not about ego, status, or asserting power over others. They were about integrity, patience, and recognizing the humanity in every individual, regardless of how they appeared or what they carried with them. Jonathan Roumie had left quietly, but the ripple of his presence remained. His calm demeanor, his quiet authority, and the simple yet profound way he handled a potentially humiliating situation had transformed the entire hotel environment. Guests and staff alike had witnessed a masterclass in humility. They had seen firsthand that true respect is not something that can be demanded or enforced. It is something earned through kindness, patience, and genuine understanding. The executives moved efficiently, implementing the changes Jonathan had envisioned. But even they understood that the real impact of the evening would not be measured in paperwork or new policies. The true effect lay in the hearts and minds of the people who had been present. Each individual carried a lesson, invisible but powerful. Arrogance blinds, patience teaches, and humility transforms. Lisa turned to the staff, her voice steady now, filled with sincerity. "Tonight we learned something invaluable," she said softly. Respect is not a favor to be given or withheld. It is a choice we make every single moment to treat everyone, guest, colleague, or stranger, with dignity. We can't always know who someone is or what they're capable of, but we can always choose kindness. A young clerk, who had been silent throughout the evening, nodded. "I'll remember that," he said. "It changes everything," and indeed it did. The hotel staff, inspired by the example Jonathan had set, carried themselves differently. They approached guests with renewed courtesy, colleagues with genuine collaboration, and every interaction with the quiet awareness that respect and humility were the true measures of character. For Lisa, the lesson was personal. She had come face to face with the consequences of arrogance, but she had also seen the power of grace. She understood that leadership was not about authority enforced through fear or status. It was about influence earned through patience, integrity, and example. The realization was transformative, a moment of awakening that would guide her decisions, actions, and interactions for the rest of her career. Jonathan Roumie had entered the hotel as a simple guest, carrying no entourage, no grand announcement, no spectacle. Yet in 9 minutes he had delivered a lesson far more impactful than any corporate seminar or management training. His presence had reminded everyone in the lobby, guests, staff, and even Lisa herself, that respect is universal. Humility is strength, and true authority comes quietly. As the night settled, the lobby returned to normal activity, but the story lingered like an invisible echo. Staff shared it in hushed tones among themselves. Guests recounted it with wide-eyed astonishment, and even those who had merely witnessed it through a recording felt the weight of its message. And the moral was clear. Respect is not reserved for the powerful, the famous, or the wealthy. It is a currency available to all, earned not by position but by action. Humility is not weakness, it is strength. Patience is not inaction, it is the most powerful form of action. And one act of quiet dignity, even in the face of arrogance or disrespect, can change more hearts and minds than 1,000 lectures. Jonathan Roumie left the hotel that night having done far more than check into a room. He had shown without fanfare or judgment that the measure of a person is not in the titles they hold or the money they carry, but in the respect they give and the patience they embody. And for Lisa, for the staff, and for the guests who bore witness, the lesson would remain forever. True power is silent. True respect is earned. And one small act of humility can create ripples that transform an entire environment. Type respect in the comments if you believe that humility is real strength. Share where you're watching from, and let's celebrate the power of kindness together.